All right, we are back out at the Red Rocks Amphitheatre, but this time we are building a custom entry cabinet. So this entry cabinet was one of the things that got me interested in the Red Rocks project in the first place. The designers were looking for a local craftsman to create some type of furniture that was also a piece of art. So this cabinet is what I came up with and what I submitted as part of my bid package. So whenever I build something like this entry cabinet or a desk or a table where the top is going to be one of the main things that you see, I always try to go through and pick some of the best looking wood for the top since it's kind of the focal point. In this case, the doors are going to be the focal point. They're going to be the art piece that has the patinated metal, the real decorative feature that's going to make the cabinet pop. So for the top, I still tried to pick out some really nice boards, but I wanted them to be a little bit more plain as not to take away from the main focal point. So I just try to pick out some nice straight grain pieces for the top. All right, then I did a similar selection process for the legs, trying to find just some clean straight grain. And when I cut them to length, just to help consistency at the table saw, make sure everything comes out nice and square, I used a stop on my miter gauge. All right, I spent a few minutes trying to decide which legs had the best looking grain and how that grain kind of matched together. And the best looking grain went to the front, and the two ugly legs, or maybe I shouldn't say ugly legs, but the less desirable legs went to the back. All right, now for the rails, I milled up some similar stock and again used a stop at the miter gauge to make sure they're all cut to the same length. The stop is an invaluable tool to making sure everything comes out consistent and square. All right, so my joinery method of choice for this project was the domino. I know some people get a little upset about the domino because it's so easy to use, but like, what's wrong with being easy, accurate, and fast when you're trying to make money? So yeah, the domino was the joinery of choice for this project. All right, there was one challenge with using the domino, and that is where the side rails met the front and back rails. Those mortises in the corner of the leg meet inside there, so the dominoes interfered with each other. So basically what I'm doing is trimming them off at a 45-degree angle, so that way they come to a miter point inside the leg and will not interfere with each other. All right, our side panels for the cabinet are going to be held in place in a groove in the legs. And so I've created a stop and start point on the router table, so that way I can basically drop the leg down onto my start point and then go along until I hit my stop point and pull it back up. So that way I have a nice groove perfectly placed where I need it without overshooting into my joinery area. All right, so now for consistency, since I already had everything set up at the router table, I used that same setup to cut the grooves in the rails. And the only thing I had to make sure I paid attention to was the outside face, to make sure the outside face faced the fence, to make sure the groove was in the right spot. All right, so before we can assemble the case, we need to create some side panels. So I milled down some lumber just to the right thickness so it slid into the grooves that we had just made. And then, of course, a little bit of standard panel glue up here. All right, and so since our panels are solid wood, they're going to expand and contract some. So I cut them about 1/16 of an inch narrower than what I needed in the width, just to give them that little extra room to expand and contract. All right, to add a little bit of elegance to the final design, I decided to create a little bit of a curve on the bottom rails. So basically what I'm doing here is just kind of trying to sketch in about how much of a curve I want. All right, and then once I was happy with the curve, I roughed it out at the bandsaw. All right, and then at the spindle sander, I just went to work removing any kind of saw marks and bump marks and just fairing that curve out to where I get it dialed in to where I like it. And that spindle sander just wasn't quite getting it done for me, so I used a flexible sanding strip to really just smooth that curve out and even out any kind of bumps left behind by the bandsaw. And then once I was happy with the curve, I wanted to make the back match the front. So I basically just traced that on there and went to the bandsaw, cut it out, and then I double stick taped the two pieces together and went to the router table with a pattern bit to create the final curve on the back. So now for the bottom, it is going to get glued between the front and back rail. So I don't want to use solid wood because that solid wood could expand and contract, causing joinery issues, pushing my side panel joints apart, or causing cracking issues if it shrank too much. So basically I am going to veneer up a piece of plywood with some walnut veneer here, and that way it'll help lock in the movement. It won't move as much, so all my joinery should stay nice and tight without any risk of having pressure put on it. All right, so there's going to be an adjustable shelf in this thing, and I would have loved to have done some kind of fancy ladder system for the adjustable shelving, but since we're building to a budget here, basically what I'm doing here is I'm gluing in a couple of spacers that will get the shelf pin holes routed into it. All right, so I know in a past video I said throw away all your jigs so you continue to force yourself to create fresh designs, but sometimes the utilitarian ones I do keep. So this is yeah, a shelf pin jig I've had for a while, and I just keep repurposing it. All right, so now that I got all the joinery and stuff done on the legs, I have my blade tilted just a little bit to create a bevel on the bottom of the legs, just to kind of create a little bit of visual interest for the feet. All right, trying to glue up the entire cabinet all at once would get a little bit out of hand, a little bit cumbersome, and cause me to rush and not have time to make sure I had everything squared up before the glue set up. So basically, I am gluing up a couple of sub-assemblies. I'm going to glue up the sides first, and then I'll glue the sides to the front and backs. And then, of course, I pre-finished all the panels to make sure that if there's any kind of expansion contraction, that no bare wood shows through. If I were to glue this whole thing up with the center panel unfinished and then it shrank after I finished it, then you'd see a little line there of unfinished wood. So I always pre-finish my panels before glue up. All right, so now that the side panels are dry, I'm going to start putting the rest of the case together. And for the back of the case, I did set the panels in the dados so they would look nice, because I never know how this cabinet is going to be used. If it might be used as like a little serving station, and so the back might be facing the customer. So I still wanted to make sure that the back looked good if they happen to turn it around and use it as like a staging area or something. All right, and the last thing I needed to glue up was the frame for the doors, and I used dominoes for that joinery as well. All right, so I need to create a dado on the back of the door, and this dado is for the decorative grid and the decorative steel panel to go into. So basically, to do this, I have a rabbiting bit set up in the router table, and I'm just going to trace around the inside edge of the door panel. And of course, the router bit leaves rounded corners, so I'm just going to square those guys up with a chisel, so that way the square steel panel can drop right in. All right, so now I'm turning my attention to creating the grid work for the doors. The grid work is going to be constructed of a series of half laps at each intersection. And while cutting these half laps at the table saw with a dado blade, since this material is so thin, to help eliminate chatter, I'm just using a piece of scrap wood to put some downward pressure on top of the blade to make sure that it doesn't chatter and bounce around, and I get a good, clean, accurate to depth cut. All right, and then after a little bit of sanding off camera, I assembled them with a little bit of dab of glue at each joint. Right, so now those half flaps that go around the edge of the grid are going to snap into the rabbet in the door frame, but they don't fit flush, so I'm going to have to go around and mortise out each intersection to make sure that they fit flush inside that frame, because I want them to fit flush to the front of the door for aesthetics, and I also want my steel panel to be able to drop in there and fit tight in the rabbet and also tight against the frame. So to get started, I'm just going to go around with my marking knife and mark the location of each one of those half flaps. All right, to set up my router plane to the proper depth, I'm going to use this same brass spacer that I used to set the depth of the dado blade, so that way they match exactly. No need for a micro adjuster on a router plane. All right, I'm going to start shallow and work my way down to the proper depth and do a test fit to make sure everything's good. And once all of those mortises are down, or maybe I should stop calling them mortises, maybe I should start calling them half flaps, but they're kind of a mortise half flap combo. But once they get all down to the right depth and everything test fits out properly, I will glue that grid in place. All right, I'm very happy with that fit. I think that looks great. All right, and my hardware of choice for this particular project are some Euro style hinges. So I'm just drilling out the cup holes to accept the hinge hardware. All right, aside from welding, those Fireball tool shims are perfect for setting the spacing for your doors and drawers. Right, and I decided before I glue in the grid, I needed to do a quick test fit to make sure everything was fitting properly. I'd hate to have to cut apart the door after I glued the grid in if something wasn't right, or have to remake the entire door if I had mismeasured something or something was out of square or something stupid. But luckily, everything went together great. All right, so anytime I put a different type of material like steel or glass inside a door frame, I want to be able to get it back out easily without cutting apart the frame. In case like the glass gets broken or a scratch gets on the steel and I need to repair it, I want to be able to get it out. So what I'm doing here is I am rounding over with a 1/4 inch router bit some material so that way I can basically make some 1/4 inch glass stop that can be pinned in place on the inside rabbet of the door, holding everything together. All right, and for safety and also to help make a clean round over, I round over material wider than what I need, and then I cut it free at the table saw. All right, I'm sorry I lost the footage of me adding the decorative patination to the steel, but the process went pretty much like I have done in past videos. So if you want to see how I do that, feel free to check out one of my past videos. All right, so basically right now I'm just trying to decide which panel I want on the left and which panel I want on the right and what part of that panel I want covered up by the grid. So I'm just trying to make some artistic decisions here before I install them. And then to install them, I'm basically just dropping them in, and then I'm going to cut to fit that 1/4 round molding that I had created earlier. All right, so now for the drawer pulls, I wanted that metal to match the rest of the metal that I had done in the rest of the restaurant. So I decided to make my own drawer pulls. So basically I've cut some 1/2 inch thick flat bar to length and basically drilling and tapping some holes for screws so I can screw it in just like a normal drawer pull. And then to add a little bit of a decorative element, I want to cut them off at an angle, but I have no way of holding that small or narrow of a piece in my saw, so I'm building a little jig to hold the piece at an angle. All right, and then I'll just clamp that jig in my saw and slice the angle on it. All right, and then a couple holes drilled in the door and it gets screwed on just like any other drawer pull. All right, and then we'll put my hinges back on, and then we are done. There's the final piece. Thanks for watching.